You know, when you hear the word learning, your mind probably jumps straight to classrooms and textbooks, right? But what if I told you that learning is so much more than that? It's actually the psychological engine that shapes almost everything about us, our habits, our passions, and yeah, even our deepest, darkest fears. It's happening 24/7, mostly under the radar. So let's pull back the curtain on this. And to really get our heads around how this all works, we're going to tackle one big question today. If something like a fear is learned, does that mean it can also be unlearned? Keep that question in mind because we're coming back to it. Okay, so let me introduce you to Sabra. She's fresh out of college, she's smart, and she just landed an absolute dream job. Amazing, right? Well, there's one tiny catch. Her first major assignment is a huge conference all the way over in Hawaii, and Sabra is terrified of flying. And I don't mean just a little nervous, I mean a full-blown, life-altering phobia. It's a huge problem. Now here's the thing. Sabra wasn't born with a fear of flying. No one is. So from a psychologist's point of view, her fear is what we call a learned response. And that's our starting point. It's like a mystery. To figure out how to help her, we first have to become detectives and find the clues that explain how she learned this fear in the first place. So, what do we even mean by learning? Well, in psychology, it has a really specific definition. It's any process where an experience leads to a lasting, durable change in how we behave or think. We're not talking about a temporary reflex, like jumping when a car backfires. We're talking about changes that stick around, like that feeling of dread Sabra gets just thinking about an airplane. So, if an experience can create a fear, well, that also means that maybe, just maybe, a different experience can undo it. All right, our first clue comes from a pretty unexpected place. A Russian scientist who wasn't even studying psychology. He was studying dog droll. Seriously. This is where we get the idea of classical conditioning, which is basically learning by connecting the dots by association. So Ivan Pavlov is studying digestion in dogs, and he keeps noticing this really weird thing. The dogs would start salivating before the food was even in the room. Just the sound of the lab assistant's footsteps was enough to get them going. He called these psychic secretions, which is a great name, and this total accident opened up a whole new world in understanding how we learn. So here's the breakdown of how it works. At first, you have food. The food is what we call an unconditioned stimulus. It naturally, automatically makes the dog drool. The dog doesn't have to learn to do that. And a bell? Well, a bell is just a noise. It's neutral. But then, during the conditioning phase, you ring the bell right before you bring the food. You do this over and over and over again. And pretty soon, the dog's brain builds a new bridge, a new connection. And then, after a while, you can just ring the bell, and the dog starts salivating even with no food in sight. The bell has become a conditioned stimulus. And boom, that's how a phobia can be born. An airplane by itself is just a neutral thing. It's a mode of transportation. But if that airplane gets associated with something genuinely scary, maybe some awful turbulence or a terrifying movie you saw, or even just seeing your own parent get really anxious at the airport, that neutral airplane can become a conditioned stimulus that triggers a real physical fear response. Okay, let's dig into our second clue. Classical conditioning is great for explaining those gut reactions, those involuntary reflexes. But what about the choices we actively make? That's where operant conditioning comes in. This is all about learning from the consequences of our actions. Rewards and punishments. This chart lays out the difference really nicely. Think of classical conditioning as passive. Stuff happens to you, and your body reacts. It's reflexive. But operant conditioning, that's active. It's about what you do, the voluntary choices you make, and what happens next because of those choices. Okay, stick with me here because this is where the language gets a little weird. In psychology, positive and negative don't mean good and bad. Nope. Positive means you add something. Negative means you take something away. So positive reinforcement is adding something good to make you do something more often, like getting a bonus for working hard. But negative reinforcement, and this is the tricky one, is when you take away something bad, which also makes you do something more often. Think about that annoying ding, ding, ding your car makes until you buckle your seatbelt. Buckling up removes the annoying noise. That's negative reinforcement. And here it is. This is the absolute key to understanding why Sabra's fear is so persistent. Every single time she decides not to book a flight or cancels a trip, what happens? She escapes that horrible gut-wrenching anxiety. And that feeling of relief That's a super powerful negative reinforcer. It takes away the bad feeling, which makes her much, much more likely to avoid planes in the future. The very act of avoiding her fear is the fuel that makes it grow stronger. It's a vicious cycle. And just in case you're wondering how powerful this is, get this. The guy who pioneered this whole field, B.F. Skinner, literally used these principles to train pigeons to play ping pong. No joke. If you can teach a pigeon to play table tennis with rewards, you better believe these same forces are shaping our own behaviors every single day. But wait, we're not just a collection of reflexes and rewards. Our brains are way more sophisticated than that. So that brings us to our third and final clue, which comes from cognitive psychology. It tells us that sometimes learning happens entirely inside our heads, through thinking, observing, and just figuring things out. So let me ask you this. How much of what you know, how you act, did you learn just by watching other people? It's a huge question, and it's what led the psychologist Albert Bandura to one of the most famous and frankly eye-opening experiments ever done. The experiment was actually pretty simple. He brought kids into a room and had them watch an adult play with a Bobo doll. You know, one of those inflatable toys that bounces back up when you knock it over. Some of the kids saw the adult playing nicely with it. But the other group, they saw the adult go to town on this doll, punching it, kicking it, throwing it, even yelling at it. Then the adult left, and the child was left alone in the room with the doll. And the results were just, wow. They were so clear. The kids who watched the adult being aggressive didn't just become aggressive themselves, they copied the adult's exact behaviors. They used the same foul language, they threw the same punches, they learned this whole complex pattern of aggression just by watching. It's a powerful demonstration of what we call observational learning. So this opens up a whole new possibility for Sabra, doesn't it? Maybe she never actually had a bad experience on a plane. Maybe she just grew up watching a parent who was terrified of flying. Maybe she learned to be afraid just by observing someone she trusted being afraid. The fear could have been passed down not through genes but through observation. So now we have our three clues: learning by association, learning by consequence, and learning by observation. And here's the really cool part. These ideas don't just tell us how a fear like Sabra's gets built, they actually give us the blueprint for how to take it apart. And this is pretty much exactly what modern therapy looks like. Sabra joined a program that uses all these principles. Let's look at how it works. First, they used gradual exposure, slowly getting her used to airplanes, which helps break that old, classically conditioned link between planes and fear. Second, the therapy group provided tons of positive reinforcement, rewarding every small step she took. That's operant conditioning. And third, she learned about the actual physics of flight, which helped reframe her anxious thoughts. That's cognitive learning, while also learning relaxation techniques to fight fear with calm. And the end result of all this psychology in action? Sabra got on that plane. She flew to Hawaii, and she rocked her conference. It's an amazing reminder that this isn't just abstract theory. These principles have the power to change lives. What is learned really can be unlearned. So I'll leave you with this. Take a second and think about a habit in your own life. Could be a good one, could be a bad one, or maybe a fear that you have. Now that you have these three clues in your toolkit, can you trace its roots? Is it something you learned through association, through a history of consequences, or is it something you picked up just by watching the world around you? Because understanding how it all started, well, that's the first step to changing anything.